Hello everyone, I am Olivia, founder of the Fruitcake Society. Welcome to our first streamed event. This is Nick of Drifter Brewery and more recently Superheroes.
Thank you so much for your support as always, we really do appreciate it. Today all of the proceeds from the event will be going to both the Marcy Collective and our Drifter Superheroes project. We've been feeding multiple families and communities across the Cape Peninsula, and you can hear more about both charities in the descriptions below.
Please leave all your questions in the chat bar on your right for Nima to answer at the end.
Now this is all very new to us, so please bear with us if there are a couple of technical difficulties. What is the event tonight on?
So tonight we are speaking to Buddhist monk Nima Taylor on a fascinating subject: can science and spirituality coexist?
Great, let's put our hands together for Nima Taylor.
What's happening? Vance, how did you turn my sound off earlier? Where did you press it? No, don't move that across, sorry.
She's muted.
I know.
Don't unmute yourself. It's live.
Hi, okay, we got it working. Oh, happy day. So, Olivia, I'm going to go ahead and start. I'm thinking that's okay. Hello, everybody. I'm going to put up my slides, but I want to take a moment to just say thank you for joining us. I'm sure Olivia told you that presentation as for donations to a very important food organization. Hi, okay, we got it working. Oh, happy day.
Cancel all of that, right?
What did you do?
I just muted it.
Oh, where did you mute it? Check my screen. There we go. Where did you mute it? Because now it's not working.
Oh, I see. Sorry. You mustn't touch anything because I
Okay. So hi, everybody. I am Nima Taylor. You might have some preconceived notions about me because I'm a former Buddhist nun, but I hope to knock some of those out of your head and talk about some of the possibilities, the ways to think about whether science and spirituality can coexist. I'm very delighted to currently be the minister at the Cape Town Unitarians here in Cape Town. And so they are a wonderful organization that enable anybody with any diverse spiritual path to come together and what I say for South Africa to truly be the rainbow nation in spiritual community. So let me go forward. I'm going to offer up some possible definitions for spirituality and for science, and I hope this can be interactive so that you could use your comment sections, and Olivia will give me some feedback on the on WhatsApp, so I'll know what you're saying about what your perspective is as well, so that we can kind of get a working definition of these two ideas, these two concepts. So I'm going to start with like a possibility to start with. So you ponder this and see if this fits anything with what you might be considering as well. One definition of science is that it is the intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of, and here's the key word, the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. So think about if you were to be asked by someone what you would say the definition of science is, what would that be? But hang on to that for a moment, because I'm also going to put up a possibility for spirituality. Some would say that spirituality is an investigation into the fundamental nature of existence. And some people would describe spirituality in a term that you might have heard called metaphysics, which is beyond the physical. And so sometimes when people are thinking about spirituality, they think, oh, that's all that woo-woo stuff. That's all that magical thinking that isn't based in reality in any way, shape, or form. And who knows, they might be right. But let's see what you guys think. So I'm going to put up some questions, and I'm going to look at my WhatsApp so I can see from Olivia what ideas you might have. So our first is, if you were to think about your definition of science and spirituality, in the feedback, write some comments about what should I add or what should I have subtracted from that, and I'll take a look to see. You know, it's so interesting that I'm going to show some slides coming up about how the definition of science and spirituality has changed over history. And so whatever you might be writing in the comments, there's a possibility that there was a time in the past when that was the thought, and it might be what is actually thought by the majority of the people now as well. So I'm going to hope you're writing something in there. I want you to be able to grapple with these words and see if there's some deeper meaning that you may find. So I'm also going to hope that we could do like a little polling, and in the comments, if maybe you already have a preconceived notion, maybe you already have an idea about what you personally think, can science and spirituality coexist? You might think, yes, absolutely. You might think, no, absolutely not. Or you might think maybe. So let me know what you think, and I'll have Olivia read those, and so we'll incorporate that into the rest of the presentation. So be thinking about that. We can all kind of grapple this terminology and this. I often think of this as a Venn diagram. Does science and spirituality completely overlap with each other, or are they two completely separate circles and can't come together in any way, shape, or form? So think about that in that regard. So I thought what would be interesting is, you might know there's a Google app that looks at all the books that are available in the Google stratosphere, and you're able to find a word and say, over this period of time, how often did this word appear in a book? And it's interesting to see that when you see the word science from the 1700s, they break it down. They actually say lowercase s, uppercase s, and then all caps S, science. How did that appear in various books? And you can see that, in 1700s onwards, science was a component of cultural thinking. And this is obviously from an English perspective, so I know that doesn't globally take into consideration the entire world, but I think it gives us a little flavor of the cultural implications that science has had on the world, or at least the English-speaking world. Now let's look at spirituality. So it's interesting to me that spirituality has taken off in just the last 30 years. I'm wondering, though, that in the 1900s and maybe even back into the 1800s, that maybe spirituality was thought of in a different word, like metaphysics or the ethers or whatever they might have been thinking about, this beyond physical exploration that people have been trying to do, I would say, since caveman time. So think about that. What is this part of the culture that we've incorporated? And so in that regard, I think this next reflection for each of us to do is very important, because we can say that we believe in science, or we could say that we believe in spirituality, or maybe we believe in a component of both. But I think it's best to take a step back and say, well, where do our beliefs come from? And so if you have a piece of paper and a pen, and this is not to share with anyone, this is just for you to reflect on. If I were to ask you these questions, like, when you were growing up, what did your parents or what did your family tell you about the world? Was the world a beautiful place or an ugly place? Was it fair or unfair? Or all the myriad of ways that parents and families, cousins and uncles and aunts and everyone who tries to help us, they're trying to help us formulate a view of the world, but it comes from their own reality. So write down a little bit, and what do you remember as a defining event in your childhood, and why is that? Describe yourself. How would you describe yourself as a child? I'm going to just take a minute for you to write that down and ponder it for a minute. And I know this is way too short of a time, but I'm going to dive in there a little bit more and talk about our young adult experience. That, we all have these memorable times in our young adult life that have framed the way that we ourselves look at the world, maybe even separate from the way our families did. And so just to be aware of how those experiences and even your intimate relationships that you had as a young adult, how that informed the belief of what you think about the world, what you think about yourself, and how that translates into a belief in science or spirituality or any of these types of concepts. lastly, this it's often called about the water within fish swim, that can be very, very difficult to be able to see clearly. And that is our beliefs that come from our cultural experience, well, the community that we grow up in, but it's so pervasive that we can't see it. It seems like it's just part of the air that we breathe. I'll give a personal example of, I am an American, and I lived in various places in the United States. And then I moved to India and lived there for several years. And then a few years ago, I moved to South Africa and am joyfully living here in Cape Town. And I often talk about the experience of being in a culture that is different from my own as feeling like a fish out of water, that I don't mean to offend people, and I accidentally do so. And it's been a learning experience for me to understand sort of the innate beliefs that I thought everybody held, and that now I realize were just a matter of the American culture that I was grown up in and that I lived in most of my life. So maybe if you are American or you're South African or whatever country you might be originally from, maybe you've had this experience as well. And even, in South Africa with the Rainbow Nation here, of all the different cultures that are within the country that cause us to have conflicts because we don't understand each other. So I hope that we can take time to reflect upon our belief system and then tease apart what that might do to implicate how we think about science or spirituality. And so the whole presentation tonight is about looking at science and spirituality as sort of this dance that happens between these two concepts. Religion is often sort of set apart, but spirituality is not necessarily about having a particular religious experience, although it can be a component of that. And when we think about the oldest religions, it came about by anecdotal information. They were doing sort of trial and error, cause and effect, what they thought was happening, but it may have been just that there was a correlation but not causation. And so these are the things that can actually give us an opportunity to understand how spirituality might work with science. And that is that as science has continued to evolve and expand its ability to measure, certain science can kind of validate. And so tonight I want to talk about three specific ones, and that is the placebo effect, entrainment, in case you haven't heard of that, and positive imagery. So let me stop for a moment, make sure Olivia's all good with me, so I know that I'm still hanging in there with you guys. So I'm going to go and talk about the placebo effect, and I wanted to share this important piece of information. Now, I find that hilarious. But what I found when I was starting to research about this interesting phenomenon called the placebo effect, when a person is not given an actual drug, not even there's placebo effects in surgery, but they still have an improvement from the symptoms that cause the drug or the surgery to be required. So I want to go on to a person, a Harvard professor named Ted Kaptra. Fascinating guy. He has spent his entire career doing a myriad of studies about this placebo effect that actually has the ability to have a positive effect on human beings. And I use this form of the placebo effect with regards to spirituality, because many people would say that when you're going through a meditation or you're going through some sort of ritual, spiritual ritual or practice that might give you a sense of feeling less stress or calm, or you feel that sense of that there's a healing going on within you. Now, some people would describe that as totally woo-woo. Don't talk to me about that. But Ted, on the other hand, has done double-blind studies that have shown that in one case, there was an example where a drug company was attempting to determine if a new medication had any efficacy. So they tried it against a placebo. And what was interesting, the outcome was that the new medication and the placebo, so two patients being told that they were given something that was going to help them feel better. 70% of all of those patients had the same improvement. 70% in the placebo, 70% were the ones who actually got the medication. Now, what Professor Kapchik points out is that why didn't anybody want to study, wow, somebody didn't even have to be given a medication and 70% of them improved. Why wouldn't that be of interest to science? And so he's taken his whole career to ensure that we could look at the powerful effect of the placebo effect and actually use it to our advantage. That he even did one amazing study where many doctors would feel badly that they would say, I'm giving you this medication, but they might know that it might be a placebo, and that feels like dishonest. So he did this amazing test where if you got a placebo, you were told you're getting a placebo. Yet what he found remarkably is even if people were told they were given a placebo, there was something about the research of being called into a doctor's office, being listened to so carefully, being encouraged to talk about what was going on in your life, and this warm relationship that was formed with the doctor at that time. Even though they knew they were taking a placebo, it was amazing how many people got better in that situation. I find that's amazing. That's worthy of us thinking about when people say, the power of positive prayer, or, the positive thinking helps us our outlook. Think of all the different religious practices and rituals who are actually kind of Okay, so I'm gonna make sure that you heard the joyous noise. Nora Lau is a beautiful Methodist singer. They collected together all the best African singers here and did this beautiful song. So I just want to take a moment for you to practice, like what would entrain feel like? This sense of singing with others. And once, as I noted, just hum along. You don't even need to know the words. Just feel that sound and that vibration as you hum along to a tune. Here we go. have to admit, I personally love that song. And I do sort of feel that sense of, when I'm listening to it, of, just being transformed. Going back to this idea of spirituality is, what does it mean to feel alive? And how many people over the world describe that sense of feeling alive as when they're singing with others, or chanting with others, or reciting Quran, or whatever that might be, that's sort of that sense of feeling part of something greater than yourself. And so I think of that in terms of entrainment. So I'm going to move on. So I want to make sure we have time for questions tonight and talk about positive imagery. And this also is something that is also often found in religious practices, where